Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Seneca Grain and Bean, offering food-grade organic grains and beans grown in the Finger Lakes to wholesalers, restaurants, and consumers. More online at senecagrainandbean.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made on February 17th when corrections officers at 3 facilities across New York State went on strike. The move by officers at Collins Correctional Facility, Elmira Correctional Facility, and Groveland Correctional Facility inspired about 15,000 officers at about 40 state prisons to join in protesting what they said were unsafe working conditions. Officers protested for nearly a month before more than 2,000 were fired for not returning to work. As reported by Capitol News Bureau reporter Jeongyoon Han for the New York State Public News Network, the strike exacerbated staffing shortages in prisons and has ignited debate over the Humane Alternatives to Long-Term Solitary Confinement Act, known as the HALT Act. The act was signed into law in 2021 by Governor Andrew Cuomo and reduces the amount of time that people who are incarcerated may spend in solitary confinement. The goal, advocates say, is to prevent negative physical and mental health effects from solitary. Lawmakers and advocates disagree about next steps for reform, from how to alleviate the staffing shortages to overtime and 24-hour shifts worked by corrections officers, to the nuances of the HALT Act. There's a lot to explore. Governor Kathy Hochul has proposed new reforms, and those ideas have been met with mixed reviews. Some Republicans say that some of the ideas are dangerous for New York State. This hour, we explore the state of prison reform in New York. Let me welcome our guests now. Jeongyoon Han is Capitol News Bureau reporter for the New York Public News Network. Welcome to the program. Thanks for being with us, Jeongyoon.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Welcome as well to Michael Stamp. Michael is a corrections officer who's going to be telling his story. Michael, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Dawson.
And Jennifer Scaife is with us, Executive Director of the Correctional Association of New York. Jennifer, thank you for making time for the program.
Sure, happy to be here.
Jeongyoon, I'm just going to give you some space to take us through some of your reporting, and there has been a lot in the last couple of months. Take us back to how this strike really began.
Sure. The first day that we saw strikes was on February 17th. Like you said, there were corrections officers in several facilities that walked off, including Collins in Erie County and Elmira Correctional Facility in Chemung County. There had been some dissatisfaction among corrections officers leading up to that date. There were concerns about deteriorating work conditions and rising instances of abuse of inmate-on-inmate violence and then inmate-on-staff violence. And then the big other part of it was that there were huge staffing shortage issues among the prison system across the state. And because of those various issues, we saw folks at those corrections facilities walk off on February 17th. And that quickly spiraled to facilities in more than 24 other locations across the state striking within the same week.
Okay. And again, you mentioned some of the roots of this, and different officers may have some varied reasons for this, but was there a singular reason that was driving this HALT Act? Was it the HALT Act? Was it different conditions? Mostly, I guess, safety, the overarching concern?
Sure, yeah. And I think the one thing to caveat about all of this was that this wasn't a sanctioned strike by the Corrections Officers Union. This was really the act of individual corrections officers joining each other in going and walking off the line. And so it's hard to really have a unified front in all of this, but in terms of the general, sentiments that I've heard in talking with officers, they were mostly concerned about public safety, yes. Safety conditions for themselves and safety conditions for incarcerated individuals as well. But they did largely emphasize that more and more assaults on staff were occurring across prison facilities, and they felt that the work conditions were also not satisfactory for them. There were corrections officers who work 24-hour shifts, sometimes even more, without proper compensation for overtime pay, according to their perspective. And then, so that's one category about public safety, about work conditions. The other big demands that corrections officers had was over this one piece of legislation called the HALT Act. It prohibits the use of solitary confinement for more than 15 consecutive days, and it also places a limit of 20 days for an individual to be put in solitary confinement within a 60-day period. This took effect in 2022, but ever since it kicked in, corrections officers have largely said that it doesn't help with ensuring the safety of incarcerated individuals and with corrections officers, because they say that they need to have solitary confinement to be able to separate what they describe as violent individuals from the rest of the prison population.
All right, we'll talk to our other guests about that particular piece of legislation coming up here. Now, in the reporting from Jeongyoon, listeners and readers of WXXInews.org, you might see the term illegal strike, and that term comes from, I think, Jeongyoon, what you just described, the fact that these were thousands of officers who made the decision to strike on their own, independent of certification from their union. So they were more vulnerable here, but they felt strongly enough to do it. That's why the term illegal strike comes in. Is that right?
Right. The Corrections Officers Union put out various statements throughout all of this and said that they didn't condone the strike, and this was actions that individuals officers took to go and not show up to work.
Okay, and so how long did the strike last, and what happens on the back end of it here?
Sure. It started on February 17th, and it ended on March 10th, so it lasted about 3 weeks. And during that time, there were numerous attempts from the state to try to strike a deal that was mediated by independent mediators, and the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, which oversees the prison system, were also involved in those talks, and then so was the Corrections Officers Union. There was one tentative deal that the state struck with the Corrections Union and with DOCS, which is the prison system, but that didn't satisfy corrections officers' demands. That they felt that it didn't. So the strike continued. And then before the weekend before March 10th, there was a second deal that was struck. And the real test was to see if enough officers would return by that Monday. And technically, they did not. The number of corrections officers didn't meet the threshold of the agreement, but the state still declared the strike has ended. And now, as of this week and in recent days, we've seen that second iteration of a deal be the law of the land, essentially, and that's the deal that the state is operating off of now. Okay.
The National Guard, though, comes in because with 2,000 officers out of work, you got holes to fill in the schedules, right?
Right. Within the first week, Governor Kathy Hochul issued an executive order bringing in about 3,500 National Guard at the time. This is all because, keep in mind, even before the strike, the prison system was understaffed. They were short 2,000 corrections officers even before the strike occurred, and then at its peak, we saw 9 out of 10 corrections officers go off the job. And so because of that, the governor called in the National Guard. That number quickly went up from 3,500 National Guard forces to more than 600 at its peak.
And so where this goes next, I mean, there's debate about a number of things that we're going to talk to Jennifer Scaife about. We're going to get Michael Stamp's ideas about these going forward here. But what's at the front of your reporting right now? What questions still need to be answered, Jeongyoon?
Sure. By the end of the strike, the state fired 2,000 officers because they did not show up to work for 10 consecutive days. And so because of that, the Department of Corrections decided to fire 2,000 officers. So essentially now the prison system is short 4,000 corrections officers. So it's a huge number that the state will have to figure out how to recruit more folks to work and staff prison facilities. We are hearing from individuals across the state that still working conditions and conditions in prisons are recovering. All of this with the increased scrutiny that the state has given recent deaths of incarcerated individuals, including Messiah Nantui at one prison facility, and then Robert Brooks earlier last year in December. So there's a new spotlight, an intensified spotlight on how the prison system will be able to keep incarcerated individuals safe, how to keep corrections officers safe, and how to, make sure that there are enough staff working prison systems in a way that also has a new culture, a new page for the state prison system to be able to turn, given the tumultuous nature of the strike and then the controversies of the killings of these individuals.
So we're going to bring in Jennifer Scaife now, and Jeongyoon Han's going to stay with us here, whose work has been outstanding on these issues. A number of reports, really comprehensive, trying to take a look at what's happening and a lot of different perspectives here. Before I get Michael Stamp's full story, I just want Jennifer Scaife to tell us if there's anything you think we're missing in terms of the landscape of what has happened in the last 2 months here, Jennifer.
I think that the reporting so far has been extremely comprehensive. I think that I would add that the announcement to release a number of individuals somewhat early has provided additional fodder for discussion about the future of the correction system, and then the governor's proposed budget amendment to close up to 5 prisons in the coming fiscal year are other elements that I think have to be factored into the discussion of the future of the prison system and the overall shrinking footprint of not only the workforce and the incarcerated population, but also the number of facilities operating in New York State.
Jennifer, briefly here, 2 different proposals that you're talking about. One of them, again, closing up to 5 prisons in New York State. The other on early release, as my colleague Jeongyoon Han reports, the state is saying, if we do this, these are not violent offenders, these are not sex offenders. These are people who are incarcerated who would be granted early release if they qualify in certain ways here. And that early release could alleviate some of the traffic and some of really the stress in a prison system. There's a range of reactions to that proposal. What do you think is the right one?
So, a couple things. First of all, I think that these are individuals who are due to be released within the next 110 days. And so there's no significant time off of sentences that should meaningfully impact public safety, particularly given the parameters that have been put in place by the department and the state. I think that the fact that operations in prison facilities right now are so disrupted and have been for such a long time that the environment of prison is even more chaotic and potentially undermining of people's ability to prepare for release, that I think it's the most responsible thing to do for the state to say, look, let's get these folks home. They're going home anyway, and let's send them on their way so that they can begin their transition. And I think then the other thing is to begin looking at what next, right? The numbers that I've seen, and according to our very back of the envelope estimate, this is under 1,000 people, maybe closer to 700. So really not a significant dent in the overall population, which is about 32,500. And I think that there are plenty of people who might fit into other categories of convictions that they received earlier on in their lives, who should be considered eligible for release, because there are many people who have already been to the parole board, for example, and have not been released. And so they're eligible per the amount of time that they were sentenced to, but they just haven't been found suitable by the board. And so there are certainly proposals in the legislature that seek to get at that larger population of people who've served a very long time and accomplished a great number of things during their incarceration.
Yeah, and to Jennifer's point, we're talking to Jennifer Scaife, Executive Director of the Correctional Association of New York. when you hear that there are 2,000 correctional officers who've been fired for engaging in a strike that was not authorized by their union, being off work for more than 10 days. So the state fires 2,000 workers. They're already short 2,000 workers. There's 10,000 correctional officers. So they're short a lot of people. I understand that the perception may be when the next proposal is, well, let's grant some early release. The perception may be, boy, we just fired 2,000 workers. We're short. Prisons are clogged. Let's just let people out to ease some stress off. What Jennifer is saying is that is not what's happening. What's happening is, of course, there's staffing stress, but these are individuals. We're not talking about violent sex offenders. We're talking about people who are going to be released in the next 3 to 4 months anyway. They've met the qualifications. Allowing them to go back to their communities now might be good for everybody. Now, that being said, here's what Assemblymember Michael Tanusis from Staten Island told Jeongyoon Han from WXXI News. He said, quote, "The release of inmates before their sentence time is complete, that is never the solution. Putting the public at risk because the state is incompetent is never the proper solution to a problem," end quote. What do you think, Jennifer? What do you make of that comment?
I'm just not sure that it's grounded in evidence. I think that it's more of a reactionary talking point that reminds me of some of the things that some lawmakers have pointed to bail reform for. This idea that holding people in jail or in prison actually keeps us safer. And I think that there's lots of evidence, in fact, far more evidence that shows that exposure to the criminogenic environment that jail and prison produces can actually increase people's chances of reoffending. And so I think that getting people out of these environments and into jobs, into reentry programs that are ready to serve them, making sure that people are going home and will be housed as the department is doing. I think all of those things are the right thing because the evidence is really on the side of showing that people do better when they're in the community and they're getting the support that they need. And then the other thing that I would just point out is that, this is all, these actions are all currently allowed for in correction law, Section 73, right? So this is not some extraordinary measure that the state is taking that is pushing the boundary of the law. These are, frankly, actions that could be taken at any time, not simply in response to a crisis. So I think that avoiding the temptation to react to the idea of some mass release of criminals, as some people have painted it, I think is the better way to approach this, and just really think, as you said, these are folks who are coming home. People in prison are our future neighbors, and so the better response is to make sure that the state is fully funding during budget talks reentry services and transitional housing so that people, when they come home, can be successful.
Let me ask my colleague Jeongyoon Han, has the response among lawmakers to these kinds of proposals, early release being an example, has it been mostly along party lines, Jeongyoon?
What we've heard so far, yes, I would say so. There's concern mostly among Republican lawmakers about the idea to release some individuals early. Again, like Jennifer said, the estimate would be around 700. That's also according to the DOC's Commissioner Daniel Marticello. There are some other proposals that we just haven't heard yet, though, from reaction in terms of Republican lawmakers about how they feel about it. But there are some other ones on the table that the governor wants the legislature to consider. One of them would be to lower the age of corrections officers from 21 to 18 years old. Mm-hmm. I asked about that proposal to the leader of the Black Puerto Rican Hispanic Asian Caucus, that's Assemblymember Micael Solage, and she said that that's a really good idea because she said, in her words, that she trusts the next generation of individuals individuals to be involved in shaping how prisons can be overseen in the next chapter of New York. And there's also some other talk among some Democratic lawmakers about ways to recruit corrections officers so that there's a more racially diverse workforce in the mix. That's something that I talked with Assemblymember Szilagyi about. She said that's going to be really important to think about for the state, because having members of certain communities be involved in shaping cultures within prisons will help to make it a safer environment, both for corrections officers and for incarcerated individuals too.
Well, let me bring in Michael Stamp, who's a corrections officer himself, and I think right at the center of this kind of story, with 2,000 fired corrections officers after they striked. Mike, thank you first of all for making time for us. You want to tell us a little bit about how long you've been working in this line of work and what that work entailed for you?
I was in corrections for over 17 years. I've seen many facets of corrections. I've seen it go through many stages. What else you need?
Well, so 17 years, and then leading up to February, tell me what life was like at work for you and why you decided to strike.
Well, life there in corrections was tough. I mean, you're forcing people to work 12, 16, 24-hour shifts day after day. No one's seeing their family. They're getting burned out. It's more dangerous inside the facilities than it ever was. And people just getting emotionally and physically burned out.
So when you say it's more dangerous, tell us why it's more dangerous now.
Oh, because the drugs, the alcohol are very rampant in New York State prisons. I don't care what they tell you. Assault on staff, assault on other inmates has just gone through the roof the last, maybe 6-7 years. When I was in there, it's just, it wasn't uncommon to get 3 or 4 medical emergencies every day for inmates passed out on drugs or on something, and then they're attacking the officers or each other.
The HALT Act in New York State means that a prisoner cannot be in solitary confinement for more than 15 days in a row and can't be in solitary for more than 20 out of a 60-day span. What did you make of that piece of legislation, Mike?
Okay. First off, we have to address solitary confinement. There's really no such thing as solitary confinement because they have a window in their door. They talk to each other up and down the halls. You could hear them yelling. They got tablets where they could talk on the tablets to their families, play video games, talk. And mental health comes in every day to check on them, make sure they're doing all right. Medical staff comes in to check on them every day to make sure they're doing all right. And the upper echelon, like lieutenants and captains, they make rounds every day. So there's really no such thing as solitary confinement. This isn't like the movies where someone just throws you in a hole with no windows, one door, and it's darkness in there. No, this isn't the movies.
Okay, and so do you feel that solitary, as constructed as the way I'm going to keep using the term solitary confinement. I take your point about
Sure.
how you perceive it, but do you feel that it's an important tool to improve safety?
Yes, it is, because it separates the more violent inmates from the rest of the population, because most inmates just want to do their time and go home to their family in one piece. And some people, they don't care. They're either doing life or they've got so many years and they're young. They don't care. So violence, comes naturally for them and stuff. If we could get them out of, the main population and to themselves, maybe they could work on their behavior, get some programs, that they weren't taken advantage of out there in the population.
Looking at some data that my colleague Jeongyoon Han sends from the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, assaults on staff in the year 2019, 1,043. Assault on staff Assaults on staff 5 years later, 2024, almost double, 1,938. That's an 85% increase. Assault on incarcerated people in 2019, about 1,200. Assaults on incarcerated people 5 years later in 2024, more than doubled to nearly 2,700. That's a 112% increase. So the numbers do seem to bear out the idea that prisons have seen a lot more violence inside their walls. But Mike, did you decide to strike because of the HALT Act on solitary, or was it something else?
There's like a myriad of reasons. There was the HALT Act. I was getting burned out, having to work a lot of days and stuff, not seeing your family, always under the constant threat of, being, another shift of overtime, being attacked by inmates. I mean, I've been personally attacked a couple of times, and after a while, it's starting to get where, you get the feeling of PTSD, where, you don't know, the attack is coming. You just don't know where and when. And that after a while, that really builds, on a person and stuff. Nobody goes to work in corrections to get their butt beat. They just, want to, provide for their family and hopefully help the inmates out as they go, providing an example and helping them follow the rules.
And did you realize that you could get fired for striking, Mike?
Yes,
okay.
I did. But there's a time when you just have to stand up and do the right thing. I mean, nobody was helping. The state certainly wasn't helping the situation out. The union, nobody even knew where they went. You probably find them on the back of a milk carton. But, they weren't helping the situation out either. They were kind of, turning a blind eye to it also. So meanwhile, it just kept getting worse and worse, and nobody was doing anything about it.
Are you surprised that the governor, that the state went with the decision to fire 2,000 workers like yourself?
I was, because, like I said, they're already down 4,000, and that's probably a low end on the estimates. People resign, people retire, and there's nobody in the academy. You're lucky if you graduate 20 people, and then of those 20 people that you got, you're going to be lucky if they last a year on probation after, they're downstate away from their homes, and they can't do doubles because they keep, getting hit for 16 and 24-hour shifts. I mean, nobody signed up to be away from their family for, weeks and months on end. I mean, that's not right to ask of somebody to do.
So, Mike, now that this has happened, there are some members of the state legislature calling for the state to rescind the firings, to bring you back. Do you want to go back to work? What do you want to do?
Well, I have mixed emotions about it, because, you're going into something that's even worse than it was before we left the strike. But at the same hand, the governor, won't let us get unemployment. Can't get unemployment. She's not letting us be hired and stuff. So, the only ones helping my family out are the local food pantry, and that's it. And that's pretty sad. So after we take our only break, I want to let Jennifer Scaife respond to some of what she's heard from Michael Stamp. Michael is a corrections officer who went on strike and was fired recently. He was one of 2,000 in New York State who were fired for engaging in a strike that was not authorized by their union. They were off the job for more than 10 days, and the state decided to fire them. And so it was part of kind of a demonstration among workers against some of what they see as unsafe working conditions, the rise in violence, the HALT Act, part of that. So we'll talk to Mike more on the other side of this break. Jennifer Scaife, the executive director of the Correctional Association of New York, and Jeongyoon Han, whose reporting is the basis for this hour. Jeongyoon is Capitol News Bureau reporter for the New York Public News Network. We are right back on Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. MaryCariola.org.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Jennifer Scaife, Executive Director of the Correctional Association of New York. You've heard Michael Stamp talk about why he went on strike, why he knew he could get fired but still felt like he had to do it, his concern about safety. Some of the stats seem to back that up. I want to give you some time to respond to some of what you've heard there, and we'll have a conversation about it. Go ahead, Jennifer.
You know, I left a prison monitoring visit, which is what my organization, the Correctional Association of New York, does. We are an independent nonprofit that has authority under law to carry out oversight of the prisons. And we left a prison monitoring visit at Green Correctional Facility in mid-February. And so I was leaving, I thought, you know, this is really a system that's kind of on the verge of something, some sort of crisis. And 2 days later, the strike began. And I had that feeling because we spoke with correctional officers in a meeting with union representatives who were describing many of the same feelings of frustration and fatigue and the effects of traumatic, violent incidents, as Mike has described here today. And then, you know, just to kind of underscore the working conditions, working a lot, some people working about 80 hours of overtime per pay period. And in kind of isolated incidents, people working triple shifts, so 24 hours in a row. I mean, these are really not healthy levels of work. And then the prison environment itself is, you know, an overtly negative environment. It's just not a place that anyone really wants to be. And so I think that many of the conditions that he's described and the feeling of just that there was no end in sight are things that are very consistent with what we have heard and documented among staff. So, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate that perspective. And so then, you know, you're describing an overworked set of officers across the state. You're describing a system that, you know, needs more hires. I mean, I don't know a whole lot of people who would disagree with that. Maybe some debate on the numbers, but need more hires. And there's a lot of violence in the system. And so the state then, after the strike, decides, well, we're going to fire 2,000 workers. And I don't mean to lay that at your lap, Jennifer, but I mean, can you help us make sense of the decision for the state to fire 2,000 workers if everyone acknowledges the conditions are tough, they're overworked, they're stressed, there is a lot of violence, and the state needs more people, not less, working in these facilities?
Well, I think there are a couple of things to bear in mind. First of all, as we heard at the beginning of the show, the strike was not only unauthorized by the union, but it was illegal in that it violated the Taylor law. And so I think that, you know, kind of a principled approach is, well, these people were striking in violation of the law. They were being asked to do work that was provided for in the collective bargaining agreement. So mandatory overtime is part of what correctional officers sign up for when they decide to become a CO. And the state and the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision did negotiate for about 3 weeks to reach a deal that addressed, I think, many of the striking officers' concerns. And so, I support the decision to have parted ways with 2,000 officers who decided that, given what they were being offered, and given, you know, what they wanted for themselves professionally, that they decided to not come back to work and risk termination. That said, I do believe that this presents an opportunity for New York State to begin really rethinking what the purpose and the environment of prisons should be, because clearly it's not working for incarcerated people who we hear from dozens of times a day, reporting their concerns to us about the failures in basic operations and services. And it's clear that staff are not happy working there, and it's not an attractive enough position for people to come to work. And so I think that's where there's really an opportunity for the state to lead the nation, because this is not a New York only problem. This is a national problem of changing expectations about what a professional environment should be, what kind of place somebody wants to work and how they want to work. And prisons clearly are presenting an antiquated model of both employment, but also an antiquated model for rehabilitation of people who have been disadvantaged from the beginning and are in need of a great deal of services.
All right, so let me just follow up that last point, and then I'm going to let Mike respond, and then we're going to talk to Jeongyoon a little bit about what her reporting has yielded from state senators and members of the Assembly who were not available to join us on today's program, but we do expect on a future program to go a lot deeper on the HALT Act, for example. But briefly, Jennifer, here's a comment from a listener who's watching the program on our YouTube channel on WX6I News, who says, prison culture is a chicken and egg scenario. Incarceration is not fundamentally designed to support rehabilitation. It is to punish, end quote. Do you agree with that, Jennifer?
Yes, in short, I do agree with that. And I think that the department has an extraordinary number of programs that have done a great deal of good in people's lives. And yet I think that overall, as I said earlier, the environment overall is overtly negative. People do experience, I think, as a whole, prison as punishment, not an opportunity to improve their lives. And I think that it's an opportunity for New Yorkers, for state government to really rethink what should people expect from people who are incarcerated, from people who work in prisons, and what should we expect our taxpayer dollars to be supporting? Because frankly, prisons produce poor outcomes, and as we see, they're environments that are negative, violent, and produce a great deal of harm.
Okay, Michael Stamp is a corrections officer who's been kind enough to join us to talk about his 17-year corrections officer career and his striking and firing that recently happened. And so, Mike, couple things here. Let me just start by asking if there's anything that you want to respond to that you heard from Jennifer. She said that, she understands that you were in a hard spot, that officers need more support, that it's not ideal, but the actions of the striking officers ran afoul of the law, that there was a bargain contract, that this is something that you sign up for, forced overtime, mandatory overtime, for example, and that the firings were justified on those grounds. What do you think, Mike?
Well, I have to definitely disagree with her. I mean, nobody signs up to do 24-hour shifts of overtime. If you would have told me that when I was in line waiting to become a correction officer, I'd have shook your hand and said, hey, have a nice day, and took off to do something else. Because that's nuts. And right now, it's the inside the prison, it's even worse than it was before people went on strike. The only thing that has changed is instead of doing 8 hours basic, now you have to do 12. That is the only thing that has changed. It's still violent. There's still rampant drugs. Nothing has changed. I mean, they tell you, she sits here and tells you all these good things. No, that's not true at all. I mean, that's just a bold-faced one.
Okay, so
anybody that's done work in there knows how bad it is. And these people who have done all these studies and they're in charge of everything, they haven't done nothing to make it better. They call our strike call our strike illegal, but is it really illegal if it's for safety because the state hasn't done anything, the union hasn't done anything to make the conditions better? I mean, as long as they're not in it, what do they care? You know, they go home to their family after 8 hours and stuff and enjoy. Meanwhile, some poor guy who's keeping the worst of the worst is doing 24-hour shifts and could crash his car on the way home, and nobody cares. He's not even covered by workman's comp.
But Mike, let me just make sure I understand part of what you're saying. What Jennifer was saying was that, yes, the conditions are tough, but the union that represents corrections officers bargained for the way your hours are set up, and that nothing we're seeing runs afoul of that, which is why the union said we're not going to strike and didn't authorize it. Are you saying that, for example, the 24-hour shifts, that kind of thing, does run afoul of the agreement?
Yeah, my dad always said everything before the word but means nothing. 24-hour shifts, to me, if you're going to do a 24-hour shift, that should be an extreme emergency, a riot, fire, some mass casualty event, not standard operational procedure. That's just wrong. You show me another occupation out there where you have to work 24-hour days, time after time again, and hardly any sleep in between. And then sometimes, I've known a lot of officers that have to fight just to get the money for working the 24-hour shifts, the double time and a half.
Well, I'll say, Mike,
to work that 24-hour shift.
You know, one example is airline pilots. Airline pilots, when there was a Clarence crash back in 2009, we went 16 years between commercial crashes. There was a lot of looking at pilot schedules, and everyone agreed we don't want pilots working 16, 18, 20-hour shifts. We want people fresh. We don't want people sort of fatigued. And and so, I mean, I understand the point that Michael is making. Jennifer Scaife, is he wrong to say, though, that, you know, that is strike worthy, that's grounds? Or are you saying, Jennifer, it may not be ideal, but it is part of the agreement that they bargained for?
You know, I think that what he's saying makes sense in that, it might be permitted by the agreement, but it's not safe, and so therefore we should be justified. I can appreciate that, but I also appreciate, you know, that the governor has to run a prison system. And has a responsibility to take into account multiple stakeholders' point of view, and also has to run safe facilities. And so I think that, you know, in a situation where there's really not a great outcome for anybody, I stand by my earlier remarks that I think that the firing of 2,000 officers was the right move, and I also want to double down on my statement that the nature of the job of correctional officers is not sustainable. It needs to be changed. It needs to be rethought. And I think that requires a strong commitment from a variety of stakeholders to really think about what should these environments look like, who should be working in them, what other kinds of support staff are needed, what is the overall size, the right size of the system, what kinds of facilities are appropriate and safe facilities to house the people who have complex mental health, substance use needs, and needs for education and vocational training. And then what are the needs of the staff who work in these very difficult environments, and how can we best support all of these complex needs in a safe, smaller system that is really focused on improved outcomes for everyone. So I think, you know, now we just have to move forward with those goals. And I think that there are a number of proposals out there, and the governor has also established a Future of Prisons in New York State working group that is tasked with defining these very objectives, and we look forward to working with a wide variety of stakeholders as part of that effort.
Mike Stamp, anything you want to add to that?
Yes, whatchamacallit, when you got officers working 24-hour shifts day after day, and these officers have to make life and death decisions sometimes. The state has these officers driving vans with inmates in them to hospitals. Could you imagine being up 24 hours and having to drive a vehicle anywhere? I mean, and say the vehicle crashes, who gets blamed? It's not the state. It's going to be the officer. And another thing is she's talking about, I defend I defend them firing people. Yeah, that's all fun and well, because that's not you trying out there trying to feed your family and trying to find another job with the governor blacklisting you, not helping you with any, not even allowing you to get any unemployment. So how are you supposed to feed your family? And I can't even get my vacation time, which by New York state law is supposed to be provided me. I have to file a grievance and probably wait months to years to get this thing. I mean, if anybody was to, leave a job, you get your vacation time. I have to fight for it just so I could try to feed my family. And can I say one thing, Mr. Dawson?
Go ahead. Mr. Dawson's my dad. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, okay. Well, whatchamacallit? I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any stretch of the imagination, but you really got to look at it. I mean, the state created this. The violence inside the prison systems hasn't done anything to make it better, and all that's left for the correctional officers to do is to go on strike because things aren't safe. And then she's going to close 5 prisons. All right. She fired 2,000 people, closed 5 prisons, and now she wants to let inmates out. And they say, oh, yeah, they're not sexual predators. Oh, yeah, that's fine and well, but there's a whole lot more crimes than just sex crimes. There's violence and everything else. None of these people in there are in there for singing too loud in the church choir, and they know it. But they just keep doing it. See, it makes you wonder, it really does. If this whole thing wasn't planned and orchestrated, it's almost Machiavellian.
Well, and boy, turns out we needed 2 hours for this. But Jennifer, to be fair, I think it should be stressed that there is plenty of agreement that you and Mike Stamp have in terms of what is not working inside prisons. It sounds like you have a fundamentally different view of what prisons need to become in this state, Jennifer.
That sounds like an accurate characterization. And I think that I would also just emphasize that I am taking a system view, and I think that Mike is taking a view that comes from his own personal experience working in facilities and the challenges that he's now experiencing at the end of this difficult, challenging career. And so I think just different vantage points. And certainly when something happens to you, it feels different. Even if choices were made to lead to that outcome. But absolutely, I think that the point stands that none of the conditions that he's described this hour are I think ideal. And I also don't think that it's the vision of taxpayers and New Yorkers that people have to work or be incarcerated in these conditions. And so all the more reason for there to be a doubling down in the commitment to change the environment so that people are attracted to an opportunity to help promote public safety and help change people's lives, which is, I think, what the job could be when designed and supported appropriately.
Well, we will be talking in the near future, we hope, about the HALT Act, which we've talked a little bit about this hour, and you heard Mike Stamp, who will be invited to come back and talk about his experience understanding what solitary confinement means. I appreciate that perspective. We're going to talk about that in a future program because we really want to bring in lawmakers who are not available today to talk about it. As my colleague Jeongyoon Han has been saying, the HALT Act has sparked some political controversy. You have a number of Republicans in the New York State legislature talking about it as a mistake. You've got a number of people on the political left saying that maybe they're mischaracterizing or misunderstanding the point of it. So we'll talk about that on a future program. But Jeongyoon Han, let me just give you a little space to tell us where you're going to take the reporting next here. Remind people what might be coming next in terms of questions to be answered and what you're looking at.
Sure. And, I think just hearing the comments from Jennifer Scaife and Mike Stamp, there is a big consensus among corrections advocates, criminal justice advocates, that the system of how prisons are conducted and overseen in New York needs some more review. And the governor is going about that right now. She has an outside external group doing a culture review that she initiated ever since the killing of Robert Brooks at Marcy Correctional Facility in December. That group started its mandate in February, and I'm told by the governor's office that they are going to have, a report with their insights and findings later this year. So we'll have to see what comes from that and what steps they recommend the corrections facilities across the state to take.
Jeongyoon, outstanding work on this, as always, and thank you for highlighting the work and providing the basis for a very important conversation here. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Jeongyoon Han, who is Capitol News Bureau reporter for the New York State Public News Network. Michael Stamp, a corrections officer for 17 years, recently one of the 2,000 fired by New York State. Michael, thank you for sharing your perspective. And again, as we talk about these related issues, I hope we can talk again soon.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.
And Jennifer Scaife, Executive Director of the Correctional Association of New York. Same, Jennifer. There's a lot to talk about here. Thank you for making time for this program today.
Absolutely.
We got more connections coming up in just a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from United Way of Greater Rochester and the Finger Lakes, serving the community for more than 100 years, dedicated to creating a future where everyone's basic needs are met so all can thrive. More at unitedwayrocflx.org. And Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.